Hello friends, welcome to my channel. So in this video we'll talk about how to call REST APIs in Blazor application. Okay, and we will be calling get, post, put and delete APIs using HTTP client. Okay, so in order to call this API we would require an API server. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this website called recres.in. So this website, it provides you few APIs that can be called for testing. So we are going to use this website to invoke all of the mentioned get, post, put and delete APIs. Okay, so this get API, which give us a list of users, we will be calling this. Next API which we are going to call is this post one, which creates a resource. Second one which we are going to the third one which we are going to call is this put API, which updates a resource. And the last API which we are going to call is this delete, which will delete a resource on this server. Okay, so we are going to basically use this in order to avoid creation of API server. Okay, so let's go to Visual Studio and see how we can do that. So here in Visual Studio I have already created a Blazor server application and written all the code, so in order to avoid you see me typing. So starting with first thing first, in order to call the APIs we would require an HTTP client. So I have already created the instance of it and registered it with the service collection, so that we can use it in our component via dependency injection. Okay, and while creating this HTTP client, I have provided the base address, that is the API link, the URL of this site. Okay, so this is it. This is the changes what I have done in the startup.cs class. Okay, now the first API which we are going to call is the get API, and we are going to see how we can do that. So in order to understand the get API, first we are going we'll get back to this site, and we are going to see what is the name of the API which we are going to call. The name of the API will be /API users. Okay, this is the API path basically, and the response which we are going to get back is this, which contains a page, per page value, total pages, and a data, which is an array which provides us the user information. And this user information is having ID, email, first name, last name, and an avatar URL. So we have to create an equivalent C# class, so that whenever we get the response back while calling this API, we should deserialize that thing into C# class, and we'll use that values to display on our user interface. Okay, so let me give you a walkthrough what I have done in order to achieve that. First, in our data folders I have added a class called response, which map exactly the same to what the response is. Like for example, let me close this. Like for example, this response object, it contains page, so we have equivalent key value pairs. So basically we have map all the properties to this key value pair, whatever the JSON is returning. And the area of interest is this list of users, that is the data part. So this list of users we are going to display in our user interface. Okay, now again I have mapped all this key value pair, this keys to our C# properties. Okay, so let's get back to index.razor and let's see what I have done here. So in order to call the API, we have injected this HTTP client. Okay, and we are using this Newton soft JSON, and we are using the data where our user and response classes are located. Okay, now if we come down to the code, what I have done here is I have created a list of users. Now this users I have bound it to this table, and once this user property is populated, they will get displayed in the table here. Now let me give you a quick walkthrough of this HTML code. The first thing is what I have done is I have created a header, just giving name to this user interface, that is calling REST APIs. Apart from that, I have added a new row which is also a div, and here in this row I am checking if the user is not equal to null, and if this user is not equal to null, I am creating an HTML table, and I am populating that table with all the items which we have in the user property, user list basically. And here I am populating all the table data with all the table columns with user ID, first name, last name and email, and the last one where we are getting the avatar UI, I am just using that URI to call the image of that particular user. Okay, now next, if this user does not have any value, then we are just displaying that we have no record to show. Okay, the next is that we have added a button so that once the user click on this button, this get user API gets invoked, and here in this API is where all the actions lies. Okay, now inside this get user API, what we are doing is that we are giving the path for that API which we require in order to call this get API. Okay, so that is /API/users. So we have provided that value here. Next we are going to invoke the get API. So we are calling the get async version from the HTTP client, and we are passing this API, and we'll wait for it to send us the response back, which we are storing in HTTP response variable. Okay, and within this response variable we are checking whether we have got successful status code, and once we have this value, what we are doing is that we are looking for the content of this response, and we are converting basically we are deserializing that into the response object. Okay, and once that is done, we are using the users from that response object to populate the user property here, and we are asking the Blazor application to refresh the user interface by calling state has changed. Okay, now as soon as this user is populated, this condition becomes true, and the table will get populated on the user interface. Okay, so let me put a breakpoint over here and execute the application. Okay, so it's taking a bit long. Okay, now as shown in the code, this is how the user interface look like. So once we click on this get user button, it is going to invoke the HTTP client get async method, and it will pull all the user information from that particular website. Okay, so let's do that. So once we come down here in the get user, we are providing the API name, and we are calling the get async method from the HTTP client, and this should give back that response which we are expecting. Okay, now we got the response back, and we can see the status code is 200. That is we have got a successful response, and once after getting the response, we are using its content to deserialize into response object, which we created earlier. Yeah, we got it. Now once we see this response data, that is the response object, we are getting this particular values, that is page is 1. Per page we are having 6 records, their total number of record is 12, total page is 2, and we have got back 6 users in that response. So I'll just hit F5 in order to let this application continue, and here we can see that the table is populated. Okay, I'll just refresh this once and I'll click without debugging. Okay, so this is how we call the get API using HTTP client and populate the value on the user interface. Okay, I'm going to call the post API. So we'll go back to the website, and for this we are going to call this post API, which will help us to create a resource. So in order to call this API, we are going to use this API path, that is /API/user, and once we invoke this API successfully, what we are going to get back is we are going to get back an ID for that particular user, and we are going to get this value called created at. So in order to map this request and response, I have added another class inside the data folder, which is called CRUD user. So I was just falling short of name, so I just kept it CRUD user. So here we can see that I have mapped this name to name property. We have got job, we have got created at, and I'm even using updated at, which we are going to look in the next API call, that is the put. Okay, and yes, we are going to use this API and create a resource. Okay, so let's do that. In order to do that, again, I have already written the code since I don't want you to see me typing. So I'll go back to index.razor and I'll start filling up the codes here. Okay, so just like the user table, I have created one table which will show us all the user which we have created or updated. So this table will do that. Okay, and now I have added a button which will help us to show or hide the form which is required in order to display this create form. Okay, in order to display a create form. So I have created a form where the user can fill in the username, the job description, as well as a button is there which will help us to invoke a method called create new user, which I'm going to add now. Okay, so this user form will help us to invoke this method. Okay, now in this method, what we are going to do is, what we are doing is we are calling this API/user API name, and we are going to pass this API to clients, HTTP clients post async method. Now this async method, it accepts two different parameters. First one is the name, that is the API name or the URI path, and the second one is a content. Okay, now inside this content, what we are going to provide is we are going to provide information about the new user which we have created. So we will see that in action. So for that, first let me put a breakpoint over here and let me execute the application. Okay, now we'll wait for the application to run. Okay, so this is the table where we are going to display all the user which we create or update for later API call as well. So this button, once we click it, it will display this form where we can put information about new user. So I'll just give it a name as John, and we'll give programmer as his job description, and we'll click on this create button. Now once we create this button, we are storing that information in this new CRUD user value. We can see this John and programmer values there. Now we are going to serialize that thing as a JSON string. So here we can see that. Okay, now the name and the programmer is there, and these are all the default values. Now once we call the API, we are expecting a name and create it at timestamp from the server. Okay, so here we are going to do that. So I'll click on F10. Okay, now we got the response back, and it says that we have got 201, which means that the resource is created on the server. And now what we are expecting from the resource is from the server is that we should get a valid ID and a created timestamp. Okay, so what we are going to do is we are going to read the content of that response, and we are going to deserialize that into CRUD user object, C# object. Okay, now once we see that, here we can see that we have got this created timestamp as well as a new ID for this user. Now the next thing is we just update those value and add this user to the list so that it can be displayed on the user interface. So I'll just hit continue, and here we can see that this user has been created at this particular timestamp, and this is the minimum value which is not yet updated, and we'll see in the next API call how do we do that. Okay, so let me create another user, and we'll just click on this. Now here we can see this user is created at this particular timestamp. Okay, and this is the way how we call the post method using HTTP client. Now next what we are going to do is we are going to call the third API, that is the put API, in order to update a resource. Okay, so if we click on this, we see here that the request object which we send it to the server is exactly the same as the create one, but here in the response it is giving us updated a timestamp. So we will use that to update our UI. So let's do that. So just like the other code, I'll just pull few code and place it here so that you don't have to see me typing. Okay, so I'll add few things. First one is I need to I'll add a button. Now this button, basically on clicking this button, it will show or hide the update user form. Okay, now this is the update user form. Now in this update user form, I'm using this option where it will load all the user ID, and we can select those IDs and we can edit the value. Okay, now if we come down here, we are going to add the code which is required in order to call the update API. Now let's go back to this website and see what this API is expecting and how we can call that. So first is that we need to call this path, that is /API/user, and it is expecting the ID of the user which need to be updated. Okay, so here is the API name. Whatever user is selected on the user interface, we are getting its ID, and we are forming this API name. So we will look into that. So what I'm going to do is I will directly execute this application by putting a breakpoint over there so that we can see what response is returned back. Okay, Okay, so the UI is updated. So in order to update any user, we need to have one first. So first we are going to create some users. Okay, so we'll just create some John 2 software engineer. Okay, and we'll create one more just. Okay, now here we have made a mistake, suppose, and we want to update this user information. So in order to do that, we'll just show the update user form, and we are going to select the ID, that is 354. Now here we are going to update his job description, and we'll make it to software engineer. Okay, now this, since these two tables are linked, that's why it got updated here. But what we are interested in is this update date time. This get updated once we call the put method on the server. Okay, so let's do that. I have already put a breakpoint over there, so I'll just update this user. Now first thing is that we should note the API path, that is API user, and the user ID should be there. So what we have done, we have created this API path, that is API user 354. We have taken it from the selected user ID. Okay, now we have to convert this thing to JSON as a post data, and here we can see in the JSON visualizer that for ID 354 we have updated the job to software engineer, and what we are expecting is that we'll get an updated at timestamp back from the server. Okay, so we are going to hit next, and we have called this put async successfully, as we can see. Now we are just going to deserialize the content, and we can see here that we got the updated at time from the server back. Rest of the code is just updating it to the UI. So I'll just click F5, and we are expecting for this ID 354 the user should get the UI should get updated, and here we can see that it is updated. Okay, for 354. Now let us do it one more time without the breakpoint. So I'll just update for the user 322, that is Stephen Koenig. We want to change it to programmer, and we'll update it, and we'll expect that the updated updated timestamp should get updated. Okay, so we'll click that, and here we can see for Stephen it is updated. Cool. So next we will go and look into the last API call, which is the delete one. Okay, for delete API key, we'll go back to the server, and we'll check here. We'll check the required API path which we need to add in order to execute the delete operation. So here we can see it is like /API users and the ID, that is the user ID we want to delete, and in response we are just going to get the response code of 204, which says that yes, the user is deleted. Okay, so back in the Visual Studio I have added the code I have in order to delete, and similarly just the way we have added form for create and update, we have added the delete form as well, and inside the delete form we have added a button on clicking. When we click, it calls a method called delete user, and within this delete user we are first of all forming the API path which uses the selected user ID and forms the API key, and after that it calls the delete async and the API, and it expect that we should get the proper deletion code, and after getting the success code we are just removing that from the CRUD user list in order to update the user interface. So I'll just put a breakpoint over here, and let's see uh, oh sorry, and I'll execute the application and we'll call the delete user API. Okay. Okay, now the application is loaded. So in order to delete a user, first we'll create it. So we'll go here, we'll add some user, create, and this is added. We'll create one more user and just create it. Okay, now we'll hide this form and we'll show the deletion form. Now here we are going to select this 368 user ID, that is John Doe, having a job description of software engineer, and we'll try to delete this user. So in order to delete the user, we'll click on this delete button. Okay, now first and foremost we need to uh, create the API path first. So it should be like API/user and the user ID we want to delete, and after that we are going passing this API name to this delete async method, and we'll wait for it. Yes, it is executed successfully, and as we can see that we are getting 204 as status code. It means the resource has been deleted. So rest we are just going to remove that from the list so that the user get updated, user interface get updated. Okay, so we'll just hit the continue button and see how the user interface looks. So here we can see that we have deleted uh, the uh, user from the table. Okay, so in this tutorial we covered the get method, so which brings back or which brings all the user from a particular REST API. Next, we created a user using post method. Okay, and after that we updated user using the post method, and after that we deleted a user using calling delete API. Okay, so I believe you find this video helpful, and thank you for watching. Have a great day.